Hello and welcome to tonight's Truth Proof. Paul Sinclair and I will be bringing you the stream tonight from East Yorkshire in the UK. Right then, Paul. So, what type of a week have you had this week?
It's been good, Les. No complaints. Just doing what we do, busy as ever, as it never seems to stop. But I'm not really complaining. What have we done? Done a few radio interviews, notably Coast to Coast, which has sort of got the word out about Wolflands behind you overseas, which is good. It always helps. I've done one with, Linda Moulton Howe. So I think Linda will be putting that out shortly, which is another plus.
Yeah.
And I did one with a national newspaper yesterday for a TV channel. And it was for them about cryptids, but they allowed me to talk about Wolflands, which were really good.
Really?
So, yeah, all good. And
will that be coming out in print in the newspaper or just online, Paul? Do you know?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I did a 30-minute interview with them, and it's in their hands. They might see me dressed up with a tinfoil hat. Who can say? Sometimes it doesn't end well, but I just want to talk about the film and get the word out. So, yeah, all good. No complaints.
Yeah, very good. And I'm still doing bits and pieces for Truth Proof live streams at this end. So, yeah, there'll be more shorts coming on shortly. And we're going to thank everybody for all the support that we do get and the responses that we do get for these shorts that Paul puts out. And we've got to really, really thank everybody for the support on the Wolflands film as well, Paul.
Yeah, well, it dragged, didn't it? We said, I think I was saying in first year, oh, well, we're nearly finished, and everybody's sort of waiting. And although it's not, a Hollywood epic, I think we've turned out a decent job. We are kind of wallowing in self-praise. So, yeah, basically, I'm happy.
Yep, and as everybody can see behind me, there's there's the plug for the film. You can buy on Amazon right now. Right, okay then. So who's in tonight's chat? I see there's a few people in, Paul.
Well, yeah, and apologies because I'm not going to be able to read all these names, but there's Forty and Les, Fred Flintstone, Diane Farrell, Alison Buttle doing moderating. Thank you, Alison. Stargazer Eternal, Barbara Davis, Roger, Matthew Roper, apologies. We've got Fred again, Ralph, and it's just Sober Carper. All good, absolutely brilliant. And there's going to be loads of names that I've missed, but I do apologise. It's just that they're not there for me to see. Live on an adventure. Yeah, excellent, Lee James.
Right. On that note, then we'll bring our guests on tonight. And first of all, we're going to add Lee Nicholson. Welcome to the show, Lee.
Good evening, Lee.
Yeah, I'm going to bring on David Cayton. Yeah. Welcome, David.
Hi, David. Great to see you both.
And we're going to bring on the Revenants.
Excellent. That's absolutely brilliant. I'm honestly, it's great. I know everybody's going to kind of enjoy this tonight. I mean, for a starter, Rev's going to ask some interesting questions that I'm not going to even think of. And we've got David Cayton, and I'm sure people within UFO, cryptid, animal, fatality fraternity are going to recognize instantly that this man here, David Cayton, is the go-to man. And when he were working full time at this, I mean, I don't think there were anybody in this country with as much information and as much of a background as David Cayton. So, David, thanks for coming back on. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well.
And I've said this before. Lee Nicholson is a researcher as well as a writer. And it's no boast. It's no understatement, should I say, that I think Lee Nicholson is the most understated researcher in UK, because when he puts his mind to doing something and he sends you what he's done, you think, wow, I can't do as good as that. That is absolutely top notch. So, Lee Nicholson, great to have you here. And thank you.
Thank you for theming.
No, you're welcome. And last but no means least, the Revenant, because Paul's got something interesting to share with us, and some incredible stories of his own as well. You know, in his own right, he's got them, but I like the sort of slightly alternative viewpoint that we get from Rev. So thanks for coming.
No, you're welcome. Good to be here.
That's brilliant. So I don't know who wants to kick this off. I mean, we can start with just asking you what's been happening, Lee. What you been up to? Have you been doing any more research?
A bit, and this year's been a bit quiet, to be honest. I've found a bit cases in the local media that I've managed to resolve them. It's a bit of a disappointment to me, and it's not something I want to write particularly, although I do it on file. And other than that, the reports I've received have not been too dramatic.
Lee,
Go ahead.
I don't know whether you're aware of it. I don't know whether it's your internet connection, but the audio is, for me anyway, it's not very good. That yet we had brilliant audio prior to coming on.
Okay. How about now? Is it better? I'm not sure what I can do.
No, that's fine.
Probably the Wi-Fi.
Okay.
Hopefully it'll pick up.
Okay, so before I interrupted you, then what were you saying about the things you've been looking into? Have you been too busy working, or?
No, I've found a few cases in the media, but I've managed to resolve them as mundane objects, stars, things like that. I've had a few reports, and similar, they've been sort of Starlink or the ISS and for that, so nothing particularly exciting going on, although I'm still getting reports.
What do you think then, Lee? When somebody, I know you've found the cases in the media, but what's the reaction when somebody comes to you and they say to you, I've photographed, they might, hypothetically, a row of these lights in the sky, and you automatically think, well, I know what that is, that's Starlink, and you look at the times and everything figures, and you get an adverse reaction. They're not wanting that. Have you had that before, that people are convinced that they've seen the real deal, a UFO, true unidentified? You've cured it, you've solved it, and they won't have it?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, there was one earlier this year where I think it was pretty sure it was Venus, and I will check as much as I can, and I will keep an open mind as well. So it's only if I'm pretty certain that I'll draw that conclusion. Yeah, you're right. Some people don't want to hear it, but I mean, we have to be true to what's true, don't we?
Well, we really do. I mean, a few months ago, it's probably going on for 6 months ago, I filmed with thermal that white tube under the North Sea. And I know I've talked about it before on here, and I thought I'd got a true unknown. I thought I'd filmed a USO. And I was really sort of buoyant about it. I thought, well, bloody hell, I've got something here, because I've scanned the sea with sonar 3 or 4 nights a week in all hours and found nothing. But a week later, that fin whale washed up, beached. So I'm pretty sure that's what we'd got. We'd cured it. We'd solved it ourselves. Have you come across that yourself, David? People trying to convince you what they've seen, what they've experienced is something genuinely unexplained, and you've found out the answer to it and they've not wanted to know?
No, I've been very lucky, really, because there's been very few of those. When I was an investigator for Quest International, working via Tony Dodd and Graham Birdsall, had a few what I would call false reports, or somebody trying to deliberately wind me up. But they were in the minority.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I lost count of the number of Tony's report sheets are filled in with these people and sent off. Some people joke they just end up under Tony Dodd's bed, but I don't think so. So Graham got the best ones. He did a bit of filtering. He had to badger Tony for them. He wasn't very good at forwarding them on and filtering them out, I don't think, from what I remember Graham saying. But without Tony at the helm, I don't think Quest International would have been anywhere near where it turned out to be, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So do you we'll stay with Tony for a while. So do you believe Tony he were the figurehead of Quest International?
Yes, he was one of the co-directors, apart from the head of.
What made him so endearing? What made him such a focal point then with other people? What his former job as being a police officer, or? Well,
I think that was a big plus because of his police experience as a sergeant, and he had lots of contacts around Yorkshire, particularly, and I think that's his status rose, and of course he was on very early Quest meetings before they got to a big conference level at a house called in Leeds I think it was Cavendish House. So he was always on his feet. When people went mainly to hear Tony speak and chat to him informally between sessions.
Mm.
So he was certainly a guru, and he always had something positive and interesting to say.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
great.
yeah, my dealings with him were limited. I know you were great friends for years. So it was sort of towards the end of his life that I connected with him regarding XS894, the Lightning, and we corresponded extensively over that. But I found him to be really positive and a really decent bloke to kind of talk to and get along with. And just jump into Rev for a moment. Did it surprise you that when you were in some of these areas in forests that there were an actual researcher up there looking into strange things when you found out about it?
Well, yeah, because it's like you said before, I was there at the same time Tony was looking into what was going on, and I had no idea about it. Only when I first moved up there to start working, I think it was July the 1st, 1999 was the day that I moved there, and there'd been a lot of sheep incidents with regarding the attacks, shall we say?
Yeah.
And there was a lady who lived on Stoneymoor, which is bang in the middle between Leversham and Keldy, and she had a big Harlequin Great Dane, and the police came and took samples from it, believing that it was her dog. She was that paranoid about it escaping from the house. She used to take it to work every day to Leeds. So that was going on, but then that suddenly disappeared. I never heard any more about that. But yeah, one thing I had noticed when looking at the human incidents at Dalby that Tony was looking at, some of the police photographs that I've seen aren't at Dalby Forest. They're at the Stateside. They're in Crompton Forest. So I don't know if the area is wider than just at the Dalby, and maybe you could help me with that, David. I don't know.
Well, I believe that 5 bodies were left dumped in the same little field amongst the forests. I think that's how memory tells me from what Tony said. I'm not sure of the period between each body being found, but it's fairly close. But it's pretty obvious that the human aspect of it is not confined to Yorkshire. It's worldwide again.
Yeah.
And I have quite a few images now from all around the world. And I intend to cover this topic when I finish my book. I'm like that about whether I should put some images in of the human beings. But I think people need to understand the MO is so similar to the animals, and I don't think there's any doubt who's doing it. And that's a conclusion I came to quite a long time ago, and I'll be emphasising that when I eventually get the book out, with help from Lee about lots of the images he's tweaking up for me and putting captions on. And I don't know how it's going to cost me, because it's going to be a very image orientated book, because the words just won't do when you're trying to describe to people who are not familiar with all this carry on with the animals what the injuries are. So that's what I mean. I've done lots of talks with slides and this sort of thing, which are essential.
Yeah.
So you could write 2 paragraphs on a body, say a sheep for instance, but without the images, it's very hard to get the message through what's going on. So it's very much going to be image driven. I might have to delete a few in the end because I think I'm going to have too many, and I want them in colour. And I'm self-publishing with the help of Richard D. Hall, who's pointed me in certain directions to some of the people that do that. So how I'll go on when I'm ready to find a publisher and printer, and what reaction I'm going to get from them with the topic. I might find people don't want to touch it and I'm really stuck in getting it out there, but that's something to be faced in the future. So I must
It's
I must finish it because I'm knocking on a bit now. I don't know how many years I've got. People keep pointing out to me.
It's the sensitivity of subject, David, isn't it? But it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that it shouldn't be addressed and talked about, and it can be talked about in a level-headed way. And you've always done that, but it's so difficult because I would have thought, well, I know the general public have no idea that this is happening and has been happening. I mean, what's some of the earliest reports of these human fatalities done by beings of unknown origin? Have you got? You know, how far? How many decades back have you got, or is it hundreds of years?
Not hundreds, no. The images have got the date from I think 1980, 90s, the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I don't know whether you go on, David. Sorry.
I asked Tony Dodd about the recovery of these tailor's dummies in the forest at Dolby. What about post-mortem? What about the death certificate? Have they identified them? Have they notified the relatives? And I was horrified. His response was, they haven't told them. Those people are still missing persons on the missing persons file, and there's thousands a year go missing without trace, and they don't tell the relatives. And he reckoned that the bodies will be retrieved and sent down to that secret laboratory down in Wiltshire, Porton Down, and they will be dispatched to America, and that's where they'll end up for whatever purpose they're going to do with them. So it's all hushed up by the Americans, basically. Right. So they call the shots. And as Richard D. Hall discovered in doing his film and talks about HMs on the Brecon Beacons, a young couple, a girl and a boyfriend, and how this army lad he got to know, who received some of the images that this chap had taken with his helmet camera, and Richard and myself to some extent, we've seen him twice trying to prise the images off him without success. He's obviously scared, but he's quite lame and he walks on sticks. So he's probably worried about his army pension and worried about his family if he gives up too much information. But he was on a team, I don't know how many people, who actually flew around the world. He went to Australia, Europe, apart from Scotland, and around the UK. As soon as the bodies were discovered, they went to seal off and protect the area. On one case on the Brecon Beacons, this chap reported that the local police superintendent, or it might have been a chief inspector, I'm not sure, realised there was something going on in his patch, tried to enter and see what's going on and report on it, and he was warned off at gunpoint. And an American person said to him, if you don't go, we'll shoot you. And that really shows how serious they are at keeping this quiet from people in authority. So here was a senior police officer, much more senior than Tony Dodd, sent away and not allowed to get to the crime scene of these two poor young people who eventually found bodies. So yes,
it's a dark, sinister world. Yeah. I don't know whether you picked up on earlier what Rev said, David, or if Lee picked up on it. I knew because we'd spoken about it before, but Rev was saying that the pictures that he'd looked at of the fatalities, the bodies, were not in Dalby Forest. And with his experience of being in these forests, which I found fascinating, and that's not playing down that these things didn't happen, but where do you think these fatalities were said to be found?
Well, I think what Tony said's probably correct. I just think the area that they were looking was wider than what we've been led to believe, and there was probably more. If they're looking there, they're looking for a reason. I know we've mentioned about 3 people that were found mutilated and left in the stream just not far from where their photographs were taken. So there's obviously the connections in that area, but it's I think it's probably occurred over a wider area than what Tony maybe realised or had a chance to look at, should we say?
Yeah, and I think Rev's saying that, David, with an extensive knowledge of the area and could actually recognise certain locations in the photographs, which if I was shown them and I was Tony back in the day, or you were, and we weren't actively working in it on a daily basis, we might not realise, we might take it for granted. And that's no downplay on Tony. I think I'd have done the same. But it would have been good to have had somebody boots on the ground to have pointed that out then, I think, But there you go. Lee, sorry, you had anything to add to that?
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, can I just ask, where have you seen the photographs? I've never seen any photographs related to that case. I didn't know they were in it.
I was searching the web and I came across them. So I'll try and find them for you, Lee, and I'll send them to you.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't had those.
David?
I'd like to copies of those.
Yeah, I'll try and find them for you.
And what would be good is you'd get an accurate location from Rev. With him having such a background in that area. So just to stay on this a little bit, so Lee's helping you with the book, David. How difficult has this subject matter been for you to deal with, Lee?
I've been familiar with it for a long time. I mean, I used to go to the conferences and listen to Tony Dodd speak, back in the 90s. So for me, as I discovered the UFO subject, as I delved into it, it became part and parcel of it. So, I don't really have an issue with it, to be honest. We all eat meat, don't we? Well, not all of us, but
it's a frightening concept, though, and it's a frightening prospect to think that this has happened.
Human aspect.
And when we should think of animals, but if it's humans, it does kind of take it to another level for us as humans, But I wonder how many people actually consider that this is actually happening and the extent of the cover-up. Do you think that things like you've said already, David, that this is happening all over the world, but you're the man who's done all this investigation over decades. How often do you think it's happening? Are we just out seeing a tiny glimpse of it, or do you think it's a regular occurrence worldwide?
Well, I'm pretty sure it's a regular occurrence because I said lots of people go missing without trace. So the bodies are not returned, dumped down again here and kept up there somewhere by the ETs. So, it's all the time.
Yeah.
What was the other part of your question? Sorry, Paul.
I think you've covered it, David. I think you've just about covered it. But
the sad thing is, when Tony died, we knew he had these photographs of the Brecon Beacons case and possibly others, maybe the Dolby Forest as well, I don't know. But we couldn't. His wife, Pauline, although I think she was doing secretarial work for Quest International for a long time, working with Graham Birdsall in the office. But she wasn't happy with the subject at all, basically. And I had no idea how much influence she was to put the brakes on her husband, Tony. But we wanted to know what happened to all these photographs, or all these photographs, half a dozen or whatever. And apparently she destroyed all the reports and data she had in, let's say jokingly, under his bed, but boxes. So they all were destroyed and presumably burnt or whatever.
It's sad that I know the subject matter's disturbing, but
he gave me 1994, was it, when I was there with Robert Hulse having a chat to Tony. He gave me some of his imagery of animals, like the fox and some deer with the holes in the head and that sort of thing, which is very kind of him, but it wasn't offering any HMs. So we don't know what happened to those. It might be the authorities managed to get hold of them and sat on them. I don't know.
Yeah. Such a sensitive subject. In a way, you can't blame his wife for reacting like that. You know, when you've got family, young family, and you're thinking like, you know, he's talking about things like this. Now, however true the subject and real the subject was, in a way, she might have just thought, I need closure on this once he's passed away.
Yeah.
I would imagine. I would imagine she was probably they will have homed in on the fact that the information was there and wanted to get that out of the public domain as quickly as possible. So the authorities will have probably approached her and frightened her, I would imagine.
Yeah, and confiscated anything she had or Tony had left behind her.
Yeah.
And I know we're stuck with Tony Dodd, but I think it's worthwhile anyway. It wasn't, for me, that man weren't glory hunting. I'd got new information about the Lightning, which I've spoken about. Everybody knows I've written about XS894, and I went to him and I told him what I'd got, and it was information that he knew nothing about. And he said, "I'd love to work with you on this, but I don't want it to be public that I'm working on it." He was frightened. He said he'd had death threats. So to me, he weren't glory hunting. Otherwise, he'd have wanted to jump on board with it. Do you know what I'm saying? And I sort of respect him for that. And I've reached out to the family in various ways over the years to try and gather any more information that might be there about XS894. Because although it might have been September the 8th, 1970, so we're looking at a long time ago, it's still sat there unsolved. And if there's a mundane explanation, then I'm quite happy to accept that. And if it's found, but I just think there's too much. I think Tony Dodd were on the money. I think this was a true UFO related event. I think there's been a load of rubbish spoken about it just recently, but basically I think he were on the money with a true UFO related event. And not to break into you guys' talk, but why do I say that? Like early September 1970, schoolboys, and a lot of schoolboys at Flamborough remember this, and in particular the guy who grew to be the butcher at Flamborough, Dean Bolton, said we went and looked at the landing traces where a flying saucer had landed on the cliff tops early September 1970. Obviously, that don't indicate that Lightning were chasing a UFO over at sea, but it's showing there's a presence there. You know, we've got the RAF Marine launch based in Bridlington. Just a few days before XS crashed, suffered a 25-foot by 12-inch hole in its hull and had to be beached on North Beach. I've got the photographs. They're in Truth Proof 1. You know, and does it mean it's UFO related? Of course it doesn't, but it's still an unusual one, because if you go through decades, Rev, Lee, David, you're not finding boats that have suffered a 25-foot by 12-inch strip hole in their hull beached in Bridlington or anywhere around East Yorkshire. And I've looked in lots of archives. A few days after it crashed, speedboat disintegrated, hit an unidentified submerged object, disintegrated. You know, the occupants of the speedboat clinging to the wreckage. I could go on and on and on. There's so many things that add to the strangeness of there was a guy and his mum, and it got to the newspapers. I sent him the clipping because he were really grateful. I think it were in Old Daily Mail, and I found it from 1970. And this guy, may watch this. He still lives in East Yorkshire. Him and his mum watched 6 pewter-coloured flying saucers, as he says, flying over their house, and in the middle of them was a circle, he said, and it looked like molten magma, basically, and just flew over towards Bempton. And they even got the binoculars on him. And his mum was so enthralled back in the day that it made the paper. She contacted the paper. She wanted to know if anybody else had seen it. So none of this, I realise, and I'm going off on a tangent here, guys, I do apologise, but none of this proves that XS894 were pursuing a UFO over at North Sea. But I think it all adds more meat to the bone that Tony Dodd were onto something. And just because I'm looking into it now, we should never forget that people like him were there before me. Full respect to that man, you know. So, right, enough of my rant. We can sort of jump to David again, unless Lee's got anything to add to any of that, have you?
No, it's okay, I think.
Okay, well, I'm interested in obviously everybody's familiar with David Cayton for his work with the animal mutilations. That's a word that we don't use much on here, but we've got to use it because that's basically what David were about. He looked extensively into it. But what a lot of people won't know is that you looked into a lot of UFO reports and some key UFO reports before you got involved in that. And there's some involving some triangles, David. I don't know whether you want to touch on them.
If you can spare, I shouldn't think more than less than 10 minutes.
Well, just be as long as you like. Let's hear about them. I'm interested.
Right. Well, there was 2 events. One at our local Stockport Express. The sister of the pilot, Malcolm Smith, saw the report of the SEAL family who had their encounter on the M56 coming back from North Wales from holiday. And otherwise I wouldn't have known about the 2 pilots encounter. But they didn't see a structured craft, only a very sharply defined shadow. I can see this here.
Just lift it up a little bit, Dave. Yep. Is that a representation, David?
Yes, I mean, I took the photographs from Brian. Malcolm kindly took me up in the co-pilot seat to take some photographs of their route and their position near the East Lancs Road and St Helens, where they saw the shadow. It went under the starboard wing, travelling about 100 miles an hour. And then just a light aircraft called a Jodel. And they thought they were in a near collision situation. It was a bright sunny afternoon, so there wasn't a problem with something lost in the clouds. So it just demonstrates to me the stealth technology of the ETs, because they must have, normal circumstances, seen the craft forming that sharp shadow. So it must have passed within, well, Malcolm thought about 500 feet of their own plane. And they're on the verge of ringing, well, they did contact Manchester Airport, although they were just out of the airport's control zone at that point. They asked, and they said they got nothing on radar of another aircraft in that vicinity. So not only was it blind to the 2 pilots themselves to see visually, it wasn't being shown on radar either. So anyway, I took a lot of pictures, which Quest did a marvellous job talking about the SEAL family thing. And that's was sort of like 11:45, before midnight anyway, on the 1st of June as well. And they were approaching Junction 9, and about 10 minutes away from the junction, they saw these stationary lights, quite bright, but low down. So they thought it was, the lights must have been supported by a tower or something rigidly fixed. It was so still. So when they come to the junction, on their left, there's a triangle of fields and the farm where the M6 crosses, and the slip road for M6 to join the 56 makes a bit of triangle of land. And it was hovering stationary over that area. So they passed the junction, and as they passed the junction, it moved and flew over their car, and they felt a humming, rumbling vibration sound, and it went to the right, heading in their direction towards Stockport and Manchester Airport on the right of the M56. And it was probably doing 100 miles an hour, so they were only going about 60, if that. So anyway, as time went on, it must have slowed down because they caught it up again, just in time to see it descend on a slow, low glide down into a field. But it was an embankment, and there was hedges and bushes, so they couldn't see the ground. So they didn't actually see it touch down, but they were very spooked. So Peter and Wynne Seal, that's Seal spelt with double E, and the 2 lads, 17 and 20 in the car, never saw it came up again. So I think I can't prove that it was the same, triangle-shaped craft on both occasions. It might not have been.
But they're both on 1st of June.
1st of June, 97, yeah.
Yeah.
One at 11:15 in the morning when the pilot saw it in bright sunshine or the shadow. And again, at 11:45 midnight when the SEAL family were coming home from the motorway is lit by then with lamps in that junction.
I think there's a good chance, David. It was
So it
object.
provided some information, and they knew there was, in each corner of the triangle, there was red and white lights sort of flashing intermittently. And in the centre, there was either a domed area or soft light in the centre. So that is reported before by other people, the lighting configuration on these crafts. And there's too many people have seen that and described that feature. It can't be just a coincidence. People are misinterpreting something. So that went out on the, you can see that was the images I took here. Some very good work with Graham Birdsall had a great guy to do the drawings and sketches on top of my photographs to describe what it was doing. So shortly after that, I decided to stop being an investigator for UFOs and switch to the animal stuff, mainly influenced by Tony and Linda Moulton Howe.
Yeah.
So,
this is fascinating. And you know that guy Malcolm? I mean, I as you've talked about it, you mentioned it earlier, and I thought, blooming heck, I've spoken to Malcolm and exchanged loads of correspondence with him about that case. I have, a few years ago, probably 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah, it was very good of him to send me the information, and you're retelling it like the guy told me. So yeah, fascinating. So yeah, I mean, go on, sorry.
His co-pilot, we call him Melville, but he didn't want his own real name being mentioned. Was a bit, I wouldn't say skeptical, but he didn't want to believe what he'd seen. That was basically it, and it obviously worried him.
Yes.
So it's very good of Malcolm Smith to take me up again and refly the route to get some aerial pictures. Then he diverted from that route back to over the junction of the M56 and the M6 at junction 9 to take those pictures. And Graham's guy had who did all the annotations to the images and the diagrams and whatever. It was very good. So I was quite pleased with that. So that was a January-February issue, 1998. So,
and isn't that fascinating, and sort of, I find it intriguing that the co-pilot sees this shadow. There's obviously something, a solid mass creating this shadow, but doesn't want to acknowledge what he's seen. And we throw that out to the cryptid phenomena, the light form phenomena, the solid UFO phenomena. There's so many. Who's come across that? Have you come across that, Lee? Have you come across that, Rev? You know that people, they'll tell you something and say, I don't want to talk about it though.
Yeah, I've had people that have seen stuff with me that deny seeing it, and sort of maybe not deny seeing it, but maybe their mind shuts it off so they don't access it. But yeah, it's strange how people 1 minute can be, what were that? And then the next day, like it never happened.
Why? And I'm not asking you to have an answer for this because I don't know answer. Why do you think it is?
I think there's lots of different social pressure, because it's something that's not supposed to be talked about. It's not supposed to exist, is it? But it obviously is. That plays a big part in keeping people quiet. They don't want to appear foolish, and it's hard to try and talk about the subject, which is very, very strange in a modern world that we've been brought up in, if you know what I mean, because it goes against everything that we've been led to believe by society. So I think that plays a major part in it.
Yeah. Lee, you were lucky. You found a gentleman who was prepared to be interviewed at his home, who'd seen from his armchair, looking through his window, of a very good UFO case, and he was quite happy to come out with it, be interviewed and filmed by you.
Yeah.
To him, that was very good. So he was probably a rare witness, because so many do what we've just discussed. Want to block
Lee,
so,
are you able to tell us a bit about that?
It's Ian Gibbons. I think we did discuss it last time.
Well,
22nd of
touch on it. Yeah.
It was the 22nd of February, 2021. It was. He was sat in his room and not much of an interest in the subject, and he sort of glanced up. He said it was a clear night. He could see what he thought was Venus, but actually it wasn't. It was Sirius. We discovered later, But then he noticed the distortion in the sky. This is the interesting part. So I asked him, you know, I tried to pin him down to explain exactly what he meant, but he just said almost like a whirlpool or a bit of a distortion in a part of the sky. And then the next thing he knew, a circle came out of it of orange glowing light. And what was interesting, he said it looked more sort of oval than round, if you will. And then his description was that it straightened itself up. And what it meant, I think, is that it rotated so it was more facing towards him. So it looked more like a perfect circle. And I also interviewed his wife later. This is all in the article I wrote. He'd gone to get a pair of binoculars to have a closer look. And at that point, she had a look and she saw these. So it was an orangey red light, quite large. And she saw red lights equally spaced all around the bottom of you assume it was the bottom of the thing. So they went back, he carried on watching, and this thing then shot up, as he said, at 45 degrees high into the sky and hovered there for a bit and then turned on its side. So it looked like a disc shape, or as he said, a flying saucer. So, you know, you've got flying saucers are still being seen by people. And then it zipped away, as he said, twice as fast as a plane. And, you know, the area it covered is, people will have heard Philip Mantle talk about, which is Carlton Moor, which was a big area that the Yorkshire UFOs, Tony Dodd and the like, were really interested in the late 80s or mid 80s. But you're right, it's not often you get somebody who's so open and happy to talk to you about it. You know, and it was the same with Mel Ford, actually. He was very keen to talk. He was almost compelled to tell anybody that had listened. But the rest of his family, not so much. You know, they all saw things. You're right. He was good to speak with him.
Well, the report you did on what you've called the Ford family. How deep did we go into that last time you were on here, Lee?
I mean, we covered a lot, but I had about 20 incidents over 4 years. You know, some more dramatic than others. I think we covered the most dramatic ones. I mean, I'll bring something up now here if you like, which David might want to join in or at least find interesting.
Please do.
During this period, sorry. I'll just set the picture a little. So this began. It was 94. It was December 1994, and the family, there was 6 of them, and they just happened to glance out the window and they saw these, exactly what you see, Paul, the orange lights, the amber lights in the sky, multiple ones, and they were disappearing, reappearing in different places. This went on for a while, and none of them had any previous interest in this, but they were all blown away. I tried to take some pictures and they didn't come out. Doing that, it was what Mel described to me as hell, and basically it went on for 3 years before it tailed off. But they experienced all time.
Can I just stop? What you said, Mel described to you as what? Because you just broke up a bit, and I'm not sure if anybody heard that. I'm sorry to stop you mid-flow.
No, that's okay. 6 months of hell, he said to me.
Hell. All right. Okay.
Yeah. The reason being is because it was terrifying for them.
Right.
But anyway, the specific incident I wanted to talk about, during all these strange things about his wife, went downstairs one day, and she opened the door, found 2 mice, dead mice, but perfectly led next to each other, both in the same direction. She didn't really think anything of it, and neither did Mel. They just threw them on the fence, you know, thought it's cats or whatever. The next day, they found another 2, identical. Again, they didn't really think anything about it because they weren't aware about the animal mutilation. But when he told Tony Dodd, because Tony Dodd was involved in this case, Tony Dodd told.
Well, we've lost Lee. Apologies. I don't know whether you can pick that. Do you know anything about? Oh, he might be back in a moment. Have we lost Lee, Les?
Yeah, he's let's have a look.
That's a shame.
Yeah,
he's gone.
He'll be back, but I do realise he's having terrible internet problems. So all we can do is apologise for that, people.
Do you want a few questions? Because
I'm assuming that Les has got because he's got some questions.
I'll get hammered by our viewers tonight if I don't get any questions in.
Question, please.
And I do like to get them all out, and I'll get lots and lots of questions because you guys are so interesting. So I'll start off with Rocky Newsons, and he's just the question I'll put on the screen for you, Rev, is, can you read that? Rocky Newsons, is Rev's fave Led Zepp tune Black Dog?
Oh yeah.
All right, yeah.
Or should I say, hey, mama?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to bring this up one from Patricia Adams Wright.
That's good because I had wrote that one down. I did see it. So thanks, Les. Yeah, fire away.
Yeah, well, there we go. Patricia Adams Wright is asking, do you think that area is now defunct to those responsible? I assume she's talking of what we started to show off with at Dolby Forest, and that'll be...
Yeah, I think that's aimed at David. Do you think it's ongoing, David? I think Pat's alluding to.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. It may not be in Dolby Forest this time, but...
Yeah, I think she's alluding to that particular area, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And what do you think, Rev?
Certainly, yeah. It's ongoing worldwide, and it's exactly the same. Mark on the body and stuff.
I think Pat is alluding to Dolby Forest itself, though. Do you think it's still happening there?
Oh yeah, there's lots of people still disappear in that area that don't turn back up. So there's definitely some more. I mean, don't get me wrong, people do disappear under their own accord, but yeah, there's a lot of people that disappear that.
I don't know. We are naming the name of a specific person that's gone missing, but I think we spoke about somebody that had gone missing up there, and when you looked at the location, you said it wasn't up there. Can you remember me on about this, Rev?
Yeah, it was further over, wasn't it, that one?
Yeah, it was, yeah. And it made the news. There were extensive reports about this hiker, weren't he, that had parked his car up, and it weren't the...
Was it a Hackness?
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah, that was a similar thing where hiker he'd gone walking, everything seemed to be fine with him, and disappeared. A walker or another dog walker pulled up in the same lay-by, discovered his car there with his phone, keys, and his wallet all on top of the car, if I remember rightly.
Correct, yeah.
No trace of him. I think they did a search around the area. No trace of him. 6 months later, his body is found 10 yards off the road, opposite the lay-by where his car was. So that's says to me, it's strange how bodies turn back up in the never enough the same area where they went missing.
Yeah. You know, and I'll just make a note of this one, and then because Les might have another question, and I don't want to detract from that.
Well, a lot of animals, it's the same thing. They return to the back doorstep of the owner sometime later, before they find it with the classic injuries.
Yeah.
So there's obviously a time lapse while the animal or person is up there being done the business, and they either just throw them out as garbage or deliberately place them, perhaps a bit gently, I'd like to think, on the ground. Although in America, Linda Howe reports a cow being dropped from a great height, leaves an indentation in the ground with the weight of the cow's body, and also there's fractures in the legs and elsewhere where it's hit the ground. So there was the fall injuries are added to the classic injuries done by some high-tech procedures. So,
yeah, I think you're right there, David. He's got another question because we could have followed on from that. Go on.
Yeah, Fred Flintstone is asking David, in his book, Tony Dodd mentioned poltergeist activity in his house. Have you had anything like that happen to you?
Not in the house. One night, probably 20 odd years ago, we sleep in the back of the house, and there's a garden and there's a pub car park, some big trees. So we both woke up listening to a very loud humming sound, a whirring sound. And I said to Vivian, "Are you awake?" And she was saying, "Are you awake? Can you hear this?" He said, "Yes, I can hear that." Now, we'd had a load of little injury and naughty lads breaking into the garden shed and pinching stuff, what have you. And we had a dog, and the dog would bark when he'd heard the intruders under circumstances, but he never barked when the sound came on. And also, when I heard the dog barking because he heard the intruders, I would leap out of bed, open the curtains, and look out to see. I got security lights on the back, see if anything showed up. But on this occasion, we were both somehow riveted to bed. We couldn't get out of bed and open the curtains, have a look, and identify the source of this humming sound. And the other occasion, I've seen something in the sky where we took our caravan to a place called Penmaenmawr in North Wales. And I was walking up from the little dog walking area, up the driveway back to the pitch. I glanced up and there was bits of cloud about, and I just saw some object dart behind this cloud. So I thought, blimey, was that? So I watched deliberately then, expecting it to come out of the cloud on the other side. It never did. So those are the only sort of what I consider UFO-related things that's happened to me.
Yeah.
Compared with what some people experience. So
yeah, interesting.
I'm proud. No memory of them, but yeah.
It's difficult. Oh, is there another question?
Stuart Scarry, has Rich Planet been mentioned? His films are terrifying about human doodads. Yeah, we have mentioned him. If you just rewind the show, you can go back to what was said.
I think if anybody wants to look at his work, and David will correct me if I'm wrong here, it can be found on YouTube. Is it UFOs and NATO?
Yes. Go on Richard's own website.
Right.
Yeah, I think they've taken Richard off YouTube, haven't they, at the minute? I think, or he's come off it himself. But
I
you
didn't
can
know that.
Yeah, but
so the link is
richplanet.com, I think it is. Or richplanettv.com, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. You'll find it with a search, yeah. So
I think in all fairness, I mean, we might not always agree with what Richard D. Hall's doing, but he's a brave man and he's putting it out there and trying to get to the truth. And that, sometimes you've got to ruffle a few feathers to get to that truth. And he's trying, isn't he? Let's face it. He don't always get it right, but he's trying.
He's done a good job with certain things. He's definitely he's pushed stuff to the edge when it comes to the thing that happened in Manchester. But what he's saying and how he puts it forward is, I can see his point, definitely. So when you get close to the truth, people come down on you, don't you? But
yeah. And have we more questions, Les?
Oh, yes.
Right.
Rivington Pike Beast, Lee Roscoe. Welcome to the show, Lee. Question, over how long did Dolby Forest to Human reports from start to finish last?
Well, I'll let David to answer that. I've got a little bit to go on that, but go on.
To be honest, I don't really know when it all started and when it finished. It's just a casual conversations over the phone to Tony. Quite great length about the whys and wherefores and what happened to the bodies and so on. So I can't honestly say when it first started and when it finished. I presume there is a time lapse of it going on, but I don't know. Any ideas?
Sorry, go on, Rev.
I was just going to say there's that talk that Tony did, and he talked. I think he believed it had been going on more than just them cases that he came across. I think from that talk, the impression I get off of that.
Yeah, well, I don't disagree with him there. Yeah, but on those specific Dolby Forest bodies, it's just around the dates they occurred. What was it, 99? 99?
I think we were looking at 97 to about probably 201, but I could be wrong, David. You might have more knowledge of that than me. But there's a similarity to everything, because back in 97, 98, there's a guy driving to work. He worked at the Malton Bacon factory, and he's driving to work, and I think he's going between what's called Ruston and Driffield. And it's I find it bizarre. It's what people don't pick up on. He said a big cat ran out and hit his car. with such force that it nearly turned it over. And there's a picture of him stood behind the ripped off wing and like parts of this Austin Allegro, so you can see how far back we're going. But what I find bizarre is that what he's talked about before. He said, I saw a rabbit dead on the road. He saw a fox dead on the road. Then he saw another animal a dog. He saw a dog dead on the road, all dead on the road as he's driving and in close proximity, but not together, but close proximity. And then he said this cat ran out and hit the car. So what happened before interests me, because I recall that Tony Dodd said that around Dalby and those areas, there'd been various animals as people were driving to work found on the road, including a donkey of all things, I think, that he talked about. I don't know if your memory, if you can remember any of that, David,
Yeah, now you brought it. I remember Tony saying there was certain roads in the forest area, the police had blocked them off. I think there might have been army involved as well, where there was like a heap of animal mutes, various sorts of animals, all together. There might have been over a few yards on the stretch of road, but they're virtually together. So
it's
fascinating. Going on to the animals the same time of the HMs.
Yeah. And it's fascinating that I wish I'd have known him back in the 90s and been looking at it as in depth, because I think, I'm not saying that's the same thing that's working or doing what it's doing, but I think there's a lot of similarities with that report from the late 1990s to what he were looking into. So I just do think it's fascinating. Pat had left me a question, but you've already read it out, Les. Have you got any more?
Yeah, I can get a couple more in. I've got one from Colin Falcon. I'll put that question on the screen. Colin Falcon, question for David. How many abductions do you believe are MALABs?
To be honest, I have no idea. It's not a side of the topic I've really looked at seriously. And I'm a bit dubious about these MALAB cases. Again, there's no real hard evidence. That's the trouble. Well, not to me anyway. I don't know of any hard evidence. So I'm not disputing that it's possibly going on alongside the normal mutilations of people and the animals. But the people, they talk about people with the MALABs. And I don't think the military, the government, have got much capability to do. Well, I'm talking about the American government. I think here, aren't we, in MALABs, rather than the UK government. So
I find it fascinating.
I don't know how to answer that, honestly.
No, I think I'm on the same page as you. I don't know what Rev thinks, and
there's got to be a percentage. I don't know what percentage. Obviously, like we were just talking about before, when you become a person of interest, these abductions happen in order to do whatever they want, take you out of the equation, whatever it is that their aim is. But yeah, I'm not sure on the percentage. I understand from the Zulu oral tradition that the vast majority of it is done by aliens, but they always refer to it as coming from the earth, and that's why they feed, because there's certain chemicals that are given off from different parts of the body that they then feed on. So yeah, I'd say there's got to be a bit, but I think the vast majority is feeding.
Maybe Colin's got more knowledge of this than me or David or you, Rev. I don't know. I look at these MALABs, or I tend to think that, you get people talking about being abducted from their homes, something coming into their home without actually making its presence known, not breaking in, not breaking locks, not climbing through windows, and they'll say it's a military abduction in some instances. And I've said it loads of times, just in my head. I could be wrong. I mean, God forbid, I don't want it to happen to me. But if they've got this capability, why aren't we removing threats that are ongoing in this world today? If we've got military tech that can do this, then why isn't it going to other places and eradicating absolute abominations that are causing chaos within the world today? And I don't see that happening. So that kind of tells me that, as David said, I'm not sure that. I think that's what you meant. I'm not sure that there's as much strength to these stories as what people are saying. Could be wrong.
But then, I suppose if you're looking at it in terms of they're there to protect us, then you're not seeing what they're really doing, because at government level, we're completely lied to about everything. And at government level, there is a world government. I'll give you a sentence: Build Back Better. Every country around the world used that slogan. Everybody tried to push the same agenda. So we have a unified world government that's controlling us. Our governments that we see are just, they're the puppets that control a little area, but it would appear that there's more to it than just, so there is, if you go off that thesis, then there is a controlling body, and they're not there to look after us, they're there to do whatever they want for their own goals, and we are just simply pawns. So that's my perspective on it.
Yeah, so essentially, sorry, David, go on.
Something's come to mind. For a while, I was fortunate to have a professor of pathology helping me look at some of the animal cases. And having met him at the BBC breakfast radio show in Manchester once, just after the bombshell was dropped by Ray Santilli about the alien body, the post-mortem thing. What's he called it? The term.
Autopsy.
Anyway,
the alien autopsy. Yeah.
Alien autopsy. Thank you very much, Rev. Yeah. Anyway, Tony said he would agree to help me, even to the extent of taking samples, and even he looked at a few whole lamb bodies for me over a period. I had 6 together. He did 6 in a row. He used up all the formaldehyde he had in the department to stew the bodies. Anyway, he came to my house. Tony Dodd came over from Yorkshire to my house as well to compare notes. And Tony brought quite a few images of Linda Moulton House, but he also had up his shirt, which he brought out eventually, the Brazilian HM from 1988, which A.J. Gavard first released that to Tony Dodd and Graham Birdsall, and I got a hold of it from that. Anyway, this pathologist, I hesitate to say his name, but I will eventually in the book, I think. But he he did forensic work, murder cases for the Greater Manchester Police. So he was a criminal pathologist. And when he saw these pictures that Tony Dodd put on the table, and he studied them for a while, he was very quiet. And then he made a statement. He said, sort of like under his breath to himself, "I don't see how we could do this." So he was that intrigued by the injuries that were written about and the photographs showed of the poor man from Brazil.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a very good comment, an honest comment he made. I don't see how we could, the we mean his profession, could replicate in a laboratory or whatever those sort of injuries and remove the blood and organs in such a way as was taken from, as the post-mortem report indicated. I was distressed to find a year or two later, more recently in one of Gary Heseltine's conferences in Holmfirth, which A.J. Gavard came to speak about how the Brazilian government had released stuff from their military, and he was on the circuit talking about that. But in the conference dinner, which was in an Indian restaurant, and he'd had a few bevies at the time, dropped a bombshell on me, and Richard D. Hall was present, saying that this chap's injuries was caused by not an aliens, but animals, rats, and birds, vultures.
Vultures.
Which struck me rigid, how he could possibly come out with such a ridiculous statement. And later, I ended up with an email interchange that went on quite a long time post the conference. After I'd given him a print of another HM had come across that looked like he was a young lad from Poland or somewhere. He looked at least European anyway. And your room he never made any comment. When he looked at it, he just went back to his room, unlocked the door, put the photograph inside and came out. So later on a Saturday night, in the restaurant, in the bar, he came out with this. And I put it to him more than once that his assistant editor of the Brazilian UFO magazine, who's now long deceased, who had written this article in his Brazilian UFO magazine, had obviously been got at by Brazilian authorities and convinced that this was not an ET case at all. The chap had had some illness, just died and collapsed by the dam, and the animals, between the rats and the vultures, had damaged his body in this way. And I said to him, I can't believe you're saying that, because he was the man who released that information originally in what, 89 or 90, something like that. And he denied it being got at. And I said, you've been given a trade-off deal by the Brazilian authorities. We'll tell you about what the military have been doing, interaction with these beings, as long as you don't refer to human mutilation. That particular case. And I have a young lady from Brazil I found, which I've got from a chap who was working with Richard. I don't know his name, but he worked like you, Rev, on the dark web. And quite a few of these images, which I've got prints of, and AJ Gavard, when I showed him, said, oh yes, I know about that case, but he had no pat answer who had done it. Yeah. He didn't say it was rats and vultures. He just looked at the pictures and said, oh, I know about her. She was only 17 years of age. So I know her name and everything, but I shan't mention that. But
no,
it's very sad how people can have pressure put on them, or they do a deal which isn't doing ufology any favours, I mean. And I was disappointed and saddened that he'd obviously been got at. So he died about a year ago or so, is it? I don't know whether he got cancer or what. He wasn't an old man, AJ Gavard, and it crosses your mind. Yeah, as being bumped off.
Well, it does, and it's how many people do get got at, as you said, David. It's interesting, and I know that Rev, I might be speaking out of turn now, but I don't actually think you work on the dark web, do you? I don't think you don't look on that.
No, that's not for me. I mean, I searched the web, but not the dark web.
No, because it's a pretty kind of sinister, not sinister, but you can find unsavory things there, can't you? So I don't think any of us really work on there.
I haven't done it. I wouldn't know how to do it.
No, and I'm pretty sure that Rev done as well. But
pathology was eventually warned off, unfortunately.
Yeah,
because we had a dialogue with a professor, veterinary professor in Liverpool University, sometime later, who criticised me, and he said, "I'm surprised you're using a medical pathologist, not a veterinary pathologist." I said, "The only reason for that is I couldn't find a veterinary pathologist to do the work. How are you fixed?" Put him on the spot. Oh, no. So I think he knew the head man at the Barton Hall near Preston, which was a math place, which is now still DEFRA. He knew the scientist who was in charge of that laboratory, and he spoke to him. I didn't tell him I'd had a warning from one of his staff on the mobile phone. Wanted to know who the pathologist was, etc., who I said I wouldn't give his name, who made some very interesting remarks to me. Like, she said over the phone, "Is this to do with the aliens? Not that we know anything about that. Is this to do with the aliens? Not that we know anything about that." I mean, that was a very revealing statement to make.
It certainly is, but we could have. I'm not downplaying what you've said, David, but she'd have probably just been some kind of receptionist or something. I mean, what would she have?
She was more than that.
Oh, okay. Yep, take your word for that. That's good.
Yeah.
So, but there's how hard, how much of this can be suppressed and how much of a lid can be kept on it. Somebody called me today, a friend of mine actually, and he told me that he'd been talking to somebody. I'll not say who it is. Rev knows him, and so does Les. And he said that he's been talking to somebody that used to work at RAF Fylingdales. That's as close as I'll say. Right. And he asked him about UFOs. He says he instantly shut down, but didn't go cold on him. The topic, he did continue talking, and he did warm to him a little bit. And he said, I showed him some of the pictures that you'd taken. And he said he needs to be looking towards the North Sea. He says, so I showed him the triangle of lights that you'd got over the North Sea or under the sea. And he said, right, he's looking in the right direction. And this is a former operative of RAF Fylingdales. And we're not saying anything sensitive here, so I'm pretty sure that we're not breaking any rules here. But this man said to him that he's looking in the right direction. He showed him I don't know if anybody within chat, I don't know if you've seen it, Rev, or you've seen it, David, but I got footage of lights under the sea, the 15th of this month. Proper big glowing body of luminance underneath the ocean, which moved out over a guy called Ian and Peter, and you could see it with naked eye. And it weren't under the cliffs, I'd be lying, but it was just off from the cliffs, and it moved itself out to the horizon. And if I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times, we're looking, depending on the altitude, between 12, 18, 20 miles away, and it moved away in 4 minutes. I put about 10 seconds of really grainy, uncleaned up footage onto the internet. I've got 4 minutes of it where we're all talking about it and watching this luminous light move below the surface of the North Sea. Is it a UFO? Is it alien tech? I've no idea. I really don't know, but it's unusual. And in view of what somebody told me today, when they rang up and told me this information and said, look, he showed him the light footage, and he showed him the triangle of lights, and he said he's looking in the right direction. That's where you want to be focusing, not the sky. So it's interesting when I know that you, David, you're ET extraterrestrials, and I'm not saying you're wrong, because you could be 100% right. But there's a lot of people, when you consider that 5% or approximately 5% of the ocean has been explored by man, and we know probably more about space and what's up there on the moon than we know about what's under the sea. So it's incredible to think that there's an untapped world down there where other things could reside. And I'm not saying that it's not ET related, but did you have any reports from underneath the ocean, David, regarding anything that you worked on?
No, I can't say I have, to be honest.
No. What are your views on that, Rev? Anything?
Yeah, I personally, the conclusion we've talked about this that I've come to is that it's a diversion. What's going on above us? It's making us look away from where the actual base is or where they live. When you listen and read the ancient texts, Sumerian texts, all traditions from the Native American Indians, all around the world, they all talk about these beings, these creatures that come from the earth. And yeah, it seems to me it would be the best place to put it. If you've got an entrance in the sea, nobody's going to find it. I know off Japan, there are lots of UFO sightings where from the Japanese Navy in the 30s, I think there was quite a lot of sightings of UFOs leaving the water in front of them, entering the water in front of them, stuff. And so, yeah, it seems that's probably more the way to focus from my point of view. Everybody's looking at the sky.
Yeah, we'll do that in a moment, then, David.
Following what you've just been saying, Rev, there's been undersea activity off the Pembrokeshire coast, which Peter Paget wrote about in his original Welsh Triangle in 1977, I think it was. This is an update, actually, book I've got. So there were things going in and out of the water 2 fields away from the coast strip where the farm was, where the ET activity was going on. So, so underwater stuff is mentioned in this. Yeah.
all close proximity to. Well, it's not a large body of water, is it? The sea. Let's face it, the ocean. It's a monstrous body. It's the biggest we're going to get. But the animal mutes that I looked into, started in 2017. It kind of petered out in 2019. And I'll touch on that in a minute with you, David. There's another question I want to ask you there, if I don't forget it. We're literally, in some instances, hundreds of yards from the edge of the North Sea. I'm not saying, that's because the easy access, but we're also miles and miles from any sort of reasonable habitation or footfall where people could get to access these things, which sort of throws it in a different light. I spoke to a professor when I was looking into these things at Warwick University, and I've named him in the book because obviously he were really helpful. So there's no disrespect to this guy. But what I found interesting when I was this was when I was looking into the wallabies and the other fatalities, and I think it was back in 2011. And he thought it was some kind of internet craze, looking for explanations that sometimes the explanations, and I'm going off on a tangent here, people, I realize that, but sometimes the explanations are given by academia are more ridiculous than the explanations that David Cayton's proposing, that Rev's proposing, and I'm proposing. That this is somehow an internet craze that's spreading, and it's spreading out across the world, and people are doing these abominations to animals because they've seen it on internet. And that's no respect to the person who came up with his theory on it, but throwing that out there, a bit of a weird one. I don't know if anybody's got a response to that. Rev,
yeah, you go catch a sheep and do it to it and see what happens. You know what I mean?
It's spot on.
It ain't going to happen that often, is it? You know.
Do you know? You're so right. You're absolutely spot on, because when I first started looking into him, and farmer, absolutely wonderful guy. We became great friends. And I didn't know nothing about sheep at the time. And I got to know the mannerisms. My little dog, everybody saw me with not the black one, not Bobster, the Benji. Everybody saw me with him. The first time we went onto these fields where there was approximately 400 sheep, it was just like a swarm of sheep moving away from us. They were that frightened. Over the course of 2017 to 19, I'd just walk amongst them. The dog would. They were just totally comfortable with us. But with best willing world, I think at 30 years old, if I wanted to try and catch one of them sheep, I would struggle. And the animals that were being killed, for want of a better word, roe deer, badger, fox, sheep, domestic animals, you'd never catch them. The probably slowest thing out there were the sheep. And I don't think I could have caught, as you've just said, Rev, I could have caught one of them. So what's doing it? Because you'd never catch a roe deer, and there's no bullet wounds, there's no penetration wounds from an arrow or anything like that, as David will know far better than me. These things, facial strip, ears removed, eyes removed. I was going up there at 4:30 in the morning in the darkness to dispel the rumours of the other farmers who were saying, oh, it's crows and rooks that have taken eyes. And I'm thinking, I want to beat you up to the punch, mate. I want to find these animals early doors before they ever get to them. And once again, Paul Sinclair's off on a tangent, but anything I've said, anybody got any views on that?
Well, I was just going to say, the interesting thing about the animal case is, I think, going back to a question a long time back, I think the first case that I found is King James II back in 1640 something, I think. So that's the first documented case that I found. But a lot of the time, if these bodies are left alone, you will find that no creatures eat them. They stay away from them. That's
very often the case, yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
What have you come to any conclusions? Is it just the fact that they've been interfered with by some kind of unknown technology, and they can sense this, David? Because an opportunist, a badger or a fox, is going to eat, but it's a free meal.
Yeah, quite. Yeah, there's some sort of smell of something that the animals, like dogs or predators generally, are put off approaching the carcass and eating off it. Not in every case, but 9 times out of 10, that's what happens. So they know something unnerving to the animal has happened, so that the animal they can see on the ground thinking, oh, lovely meal, free meal here, and then they approach it and say, oh no, I'll have to go.
Yeah.
And it's a fact.
But it is some residue of either chemicals or smell, or both, really, a combination of with what the procedures are being carried out. Other animals can detect it, and it's something unknown to them and frightens them off.
Yeah.
The
only animal that I've ever come across, say, like that's been roadkill, that no other, like the carrion, foxes, now it'll feed on, are badgers. So you'll always find a badger, if it's been run over, it'll get left by everything for some reason. I assume there must be a chemical that's released, and I guess when they do the mutes, it's obviously like the adrenochrome in it. You know, it's going to create some sort of fear, and it's going to create that pheromone, which they're obviously picking up on and not going for. Yeah.
Do you think it could be purely visual, and everything knows that a badger is not an animal to approach? We know that in greater scheme of things, a badger in another country, in Africa or somewhere, would just be a meal. But in this country, it's a fearsome thing, is a badger. You hit a badger with your car, and I'm not advocating anybody does, but you're going to have severe damage to your car. It's like hitting a boulder.
They're solid.
Yeah. But you know, I wrote down, as you were talking, David, I wrote down number 35, because when I were looking into these animal fatalities, and I do apologise to our audience if you're wanting UFO related talk tonight, because I realise we've gone with the animal mutilations. I'm not afraid to say it. We've got to say it because that's what's happening. Number 35, and the farmer told me I used to go up there 3 or 4 days a week in the early hours of the morning, and if I found a fatality, I would ring him about 8 o'clock, 7 and 8 o'clock, because I'd do the grid pattern of this field, and then I'd end up in some woods, come back. When I went into this field, and bearing in mind the grass is sheep, 400 sheep, crop grass fairly low. So go up to this field, open the big gate, look up the field, there's nothing. Do my grid search, look in the field, do the woods, walk back. My little dog's with me, shut the gate, and as I look up the field, 30 yards away, there's a white object. It's clearly a lamb, but it's not just newborn or anything. This is about as big as a spaniel dog, so a bit bigger perhaps. I ring him up because he's already told me that one's gone missing. Now I'm using number 35 loosely because I can't remember the number. I think it was 35, blue paint that they spray on it, and he told me it had gone missing probably 4 days before. In Truth Proof 3 you can look at the exact detail because I diaried it, but I haven't got it in front of me. And he said he's got 2 dogs. He's been around his field in his 4x4 looking for it. His dogs have helped him, not found nothing. I ring him up and I say, you know that sheep that went missing? And yeah. Says, well, what number was it? So obviously we might not be number 35 if you read Truth Proof 3, but number 35. I said, well, it's here. I said, I found it, and it weren't there at 4:30 a.m. when I went onto these fields, and I've done a grid of the field and I've gone into the wood, but it's back now. Impossible is what he told me, because when I started, I didn't go into this looking for unexplained phenomena. I said I'd just like to help him solve what was happening. So anyway, he come and picked it up. We met each other, and he dropped it into the truck. No bloating. It's been missing for about 4 days. It's clap cold. There's a front left leg missing. The ears, as far as I remember, were missing, and the eyes. And there's nothing. Without sounding macabre, people, I do apologise, but no animals broken into this for a meal. And the farmer's thoughts on this was that a fox had brought it back. Once again, and he's a great guy. I really, really do like this man. But once again, the explanation given, because we don't want to face what could be happening, is more ridiculous than what I'm suggesting. That not necessarily ETs, but you could be right, David, but something of an unknown origin has removed this for whatever purposes and placed it back. And the trickery aspect that I didn't see it when I first went on at 4:30 a.m. and it wasn't because it was dark. I would have seen that animal, and it's such a strange strange thing. I think I wrote number 35 down after you'd said something, David, about placing them back in the locations, and I think Rev touched on it as well. So, any thoughts on it? You don't have to have any, but
yeah, well, I think that's common. They decide to finish whatever they're doing it to the corpse, carcass, whatever, and they're perhaps in a limited space of a spacecraft, and they don't want the remains smelling, or they haven't got room, so they just fly low, or not necessarily so low, and just throw it out. Sometimes it land anywhere, but many times the animal owner, particularly domestic animals, they find it on their own, like the back doorstep.
Yeah,
even though it's been missing for a day or so, it's been returned. Yeah, that's
it is interesting, and I suppose we shouldn't find not excitement, that's the wrong word, but we shouldn't derive great interest from it. But it's fascinating, and it's fascinating that all of this is going under the radar. I was going to write a book a few years ago, and I did a lot of research with a brilliant author called Steph Young. You'll find Steph's work on internet, and she's really good at what she does. And we were writing about the Croydon cat killer, and the area widened. And it was so interesting that there were so many animal fatalities within one night. And I think they actually thought they'd caught the person who were doing it. There'll be somebody jump on me all over me on this, but I'll still stand by what I say, because they were finding fox, they were finding deer, they were finding cats. Has anybody ever? Could you physically catch a cat that you don't own, and catch 3 or 4 a night and return them to, in some instances, the back doors of the owners? I just don't know how that was possible. And I'm not saying E.T. was doing it, which it could have been, David, but something of an unknown origin was responsible for a lot of those fatalities. And it's something I want to jump on again, actually, at some stage. I want to work on that a lot more. I find it fascinating. And I don't know whether you'd ever looked into what were called the Croydon cat killer, David, did you?
Well, indirectly, because Richard D. Hall was looking into that at great length, and he contacted a woman whose name just escapes me. It's a strange name, who was obviously working with the police on this and knocking out spurious information. So Richard was challenging her and her colleague, a bloke.
And it was a group that had been formed, weren't it? I looked at that as well.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, I mean, there are many cases. Linda Moulton Howe, for instance, has come up with some good ones where a cat has been cut in half, or 2 halves, in the centre section of one. I've got a picture of him on the computer. So what has been removed, sort of piece like so much, and there's a gap. And 2 clean cuts all through the bone structure and everything, like a machine cut of some sort. And there's pieces missing, and some are cut in 2. Many have got the heads missing, and the tails. So yeah.
What a macabre kind of live stream we've done tonight. Now, I make no apologies for it, but it's a strange one that we've done. But I don't think we could talk to David Cayton, could we? And I know you're here in front of me, David. I'm not talking to you in second person. But we couldn't talk to David Cayton without talking about this subject. And I think it's one that has to be covered. You touched on alien autopsy earlier, David. And real or fake? What were we looking at? Lee. Excellent.
You're back.
Hello, Lee.
Is it fake? Because, well, I haven't done the research, but Graham Birdsall, possibly Tony Dodd as well, but the Quest International had looked at all the information that they could gather on this alien, describe the scene in this black and white film, the type of film to use. There was a telephone on the wall that supposedly had a cord to the telephone of the wrong era. Anyway, they decided it was bogus, and years later, a special effects company admitted they'd made it. But prior to that, Ray Santilli got all the media in his pocket and gathered thousands of pounds and dollars, whatever, from the media, and give them a date when all simultaneously they can talk about what he's going to offer you, or them, sorry, which he did. Now, that was a Channel 5 documentary. I can't remember the documentary maker, but good repute. He held back a documentary especially to include a bit of the alien autopsy. And the breakfast show on Radio Manchester had asked my professor of pathology at Manchester Uni and his colleague to look at this documentary and make comment on what they thought about the physical procedures of taking place on camera. And that's how I met him, round the table in the studio. We didn't know each other from Adam. And the two lady presenters, despite me telling the producer, we ufology, at least Quest, think this is a bogus case and not the smoking gun of ET contact, all that, they didn't brief the two lady presenters. So they came to me first, expecting me to say, Eureka, here's a smoking gun. And there'll be then a debate and dialogue and argument going on between me and the professor of pathology. So all that fell a bit flat on them because they were shocked to say I didn't think it was genuine. So I've got to thank Ray Santilli for introducing me to Professor F.
Yeah, right. And David, and I'm cutting across you because we've got great that we've got Lee back. So if you don't mind, apologies for cutting across you there, but we've lost Lee for the last half an hour. Can you hear us okay, Lee?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Yeah,
brilliant. So what about? Yeah, well, let's have a little bit of time talking about the disclosure, the congressional hearings, because I know that this is something that interests you, Lee. And apologies to David because I've stopped him mid-flow, but
it's okay.
Yeah.
This is Lee's background.
Yeah. What are your views, Lee?
What about David Grush and the current situation? I think David Grush is probably the most credible whistleblower we've ever had. Well, he certainly is. We've ever had in this subject. You know, you contrast David Grush with Bob Lazar, for example. Bob Lazar may well have been there. He had some interesting information, but he couldn't really be, you know. David Grush certainly is who he said he was. He was with the UAP task force, which is where he discovered all these programs. And most importantly, he's testified to the Intelligence Community Inspector General's office, you know, and set an investigation in process. So I think this guy might well bring us to this disclosure we've all been looking for.
Yeah. What does he have to lose by saying this? What's the repercussions for David Grush standing up and coming out with this? If he were found to be wrong or giving disingenuous information?
Well, he's certainly go to prison. He testified now under oath in front of Congress, and he's testified under oath to the ICIG, so he would absolutely go to prison. Yeah. So, you know, I mean, I don't think there's... Go on.
No, so you see this as kind of a benchmark statement in the history of ufology. Is that how you see this, Grush? I mean, the other
absolutely.
Guy, go on, sorry. Yeah, the guy was on. Sorry, go on.
Go on, Paul.
No, just on about the guy who was on board the Nimitz. I can't think of his name. I know you'll know his name. I mean, I don't think Grush was the only one that put his neck on the line, was he? There were about three of them that day.
Yeah, in Graves, David Grush. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the thing though that I don't know, a lot of people might not know this, but the guy directly behind David Grush is called Charles McCulloch III, and he's an attorney essentially, but he's the guy who was the original Intelligence Community Inspector General. So this is a very serious guy, you know, and he's literally got David Grush's back. He's sat behind him at the hearing. And by all accounts, he's advising, no, don't cover that, don't answer that, careful here, and so yeah, and not only that, justified to Congress, to the Senate, various Senate committees, and there's now been a new amendment added to the National Defence Authorization Act. And if you read this amendment, there are 64 pages in it, and they start off by giving definitions for terms like non-human intelligence. What does it mean? And the reason they're defining these terms is to cut out any loopholes, so that whoever may have this information or this material, can't say, no, they're not aliens. I say extraterrestrial, they're crypto-terrestrial, or they're multidimensional. So they're very carefully wording language which should hopefully pass at Christmas and become law. And it includes things like eminent domain, which means that the US government will reclaim any extraterrestrial or any non-human technology that is in existence. Maybe it's in a private aerospace facility or something like that. They will be legally obligated to return it to the, essentially. The other one is technology of unknown awesomeness, to explain what these craft are. And the reason why I've been very careful is, I think, is just to keep it open. We don't really know the origin ultimately. So, time will tell.
And once again, Lee, I know it's not your fault. The audio weren't great there, so I hope people have read between it what you were saying, because it were valid. But non-human intelligence, and maybe I've interpreted it wrong, but my view on it was that, and it'll kind of clash with David's view, that these are all extraterrestrials. But I'm thinking that we're talking about non-humans, because I'm purely being selfish, but the things that I saw in childhood, I didn't know what they were, and I'm reluctant to say they're extraterrestrials, because they could have actually been demons. And I'm wondering if they actually now are changing their view and thinking that these things aren't necessarily from outer space, they could be from somewhere else. But I don't think you're leaning to that theory, are you? Really, with what you said.
Yeah, I think they're being very careful. And that, scientifically, if we don't know the origin for certain, then let's use terms that are, like alien. It's loaded with stigma, isn't it?
It is. Anything alien that is adverse to what we know and understand as being human, if it's got two arms and it's got two legs, as we're depicted when we look at the grey alien, it's alien to everything that we know and understand as being like us. But is it necessarily ET? That's what I'm saying.
Could I chip in there?
Please do.
Lee used the term non-human. So I'm just at this very moment, nearly just over halfway through Gary Heseltine's book, reviewing everything on Rendlesham Forest, the new witnesses and everything. And it's tremendous work. It's 500 odd pages, so it takes a lot to get into. But he's presented as an ex-police detective.
Yeah,
the 42 years of denial. So here we have all these lads, including Larry Warren and many others, witnessed in the forest at Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk in 1980, and he's used the term non-human. So I thought it's worth a read, definitely.
Yeah, just before we cut across and go back to Lee, then are you enjoying the book?
Oh yes, it's tremendous stuff. Probably the best book yet ever been done on Rendlesham. And he's taken information out of other authors and examined it and studied it, decided whether that was relevant or not. And he's analysed all the information. He's been so thorough. It's a great credit to him. It's a fantastic piece of work.
Absolutely. I mean,
he's had criticism from a few people because he's done the book and issued it earlier this year prior to the documentary Capel Green coming out, and some people feel he's destroyed the interest and taken the cream off the impact of the documentary. But I don't think he has. I think it will complement the documentary when we all see it eventually, what he's written in that book. It just substantiates the real evidence. So
some people probably disagree with what I'm going to say now, but the book, Gary Heseltine, is what he's got to say is as valid as anybody, and I'd love to hear him. I'd love to speak to him. You know, I can't see that that there'd be a problem there for me speaking to him, and I do realise that I've got friends in both camps here, if that's the correct thing to say, because I'm reluctant. I don't want to sit on fence either way of it, and if I think something's wrong, I say it. But equally so, you're saying to me that book is absolutely brilliant, and yeah, why not? Why not advocate it? That's all good. Let's jump back to Lee.
Yeah.
Sorry, Lee, you probably lost your train of thought there, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were talking about the hearings. So, right, let me just give, unless Reb's got any thoughts on these hearings.
Yeah, plenty, yeah.
Yeah, go on. Saves me talking.
We've been told the truth by the people that have been lying to us. That makes sense. When I've watched, is it David Grush? Is that how you pronounce it? When I've watched his testimony, he's under extreme pressure and he's bullshitting his way through it. He's telling you what you want to hear, and he's doing a very good job of it. We're not going to get any disclosure from the people that have been keeping it from us. What they want to do is herd everybody together because of the internet. They've now reached a point where they've got to start giving little bits, but they're going to mix it in with the bullshit. So it's going to send you off in a bit of a right direction, but you're always going to get back to your own tail. And that's the way they do stuff. And that's the way it's been done as long as you look back through time. So, yeah, they're not going to tell you anything. And anybody that speaks out you won't see them again. So that's my take on it. I just think, can't trust them.
Your views on that, Rev? Lee, sorry.
I mean, I do disagree, actually, respectfully, only because, don't necessarily lump everybody in as the government. What we can see has happened is that David Grush was working with the UAP task force, which was congressionally mandated, so it's not the federal government. And he's discovered the program there. He's been tasked to uncover it. But if you look back, you can see the trail of what's happened here, which is basically the guys from the National Institute for Discovery Science eventually got the foot in the door of the government with the OSAP program, and they tried to get access to these programs, and they were denied. And so it's people like Lou Elizondo and like Kit Green and Hal Potoff and Eric Davis, who are behind the scenes or working with Congress to point them in the right direction to find these programs and force the federal government to declassify it. Excuse me, because essentially the federal government is keeping it secret from the other half of the government, to Congress and to some degree, even the presidents. That's my take. That's what I understand is going on. But I do respect what you're saying.
I mean, if you take the point of view that there are independent people within, you're going to get some that come out, but they don't last long. They get taken out. If you look at David Kelly, who was going to give evidence with the weapons of mass destruction, he went for a wonder one day and committed suicide. This is what happens to people that are about to give real information, and we're just being fed it by the people that are lying. And we're never.
I come back to Rendlesham Forest for a minute. All the military witnesses, quite a few of them, were given a hard time by the American Secret Service authorities, interviewed in strongest terms, brainwashed to some extent. One of the witnesses actually gave up saying what he'd seen and said, okay, it was the lighthouse beam, and that just to get them off his back. So there were lots of them traumatized for many years for the way they were treated. So if you saw something, nothing, why, if it was just the lighthouse beam, which Colonel Holt and many others say it couldn't possibly be, because we know what the lighthouse beam looks like. They've taken it down now, so it won't happen again next time. And the bases have practically closed, although I think the army have got Woodbridge now. So that just shows you the extent they go to shut military witnesses up who come forward,
Yeah.
declared what they've seen while they've been on duty, working
Yeah.
basically. Okay, so
I mean, if you take
Yeah.
a squaddy that's on as a sentry who just sees what happened at Rendlesham, then he doesn't really know what's going on. But if you take somebody that's been working at the top level of government who's now spilling the beans, yeah, the pressure on the squaddy, it was a lot, wasn't it? Just because he saw what happened. The pressure on somebody that's talking about classified government projects, government details, stuff they're not supposed to talk about, is not going to get to talk about it.
well, we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
But this guy's got.
Well, time will tell. But if you listen to what they tell you, they're not telling you anything you don't already know.
Interesting.
So I'll just say a
Lee
couple of
and
things.
David. Lee and David. Go on. Lee.
Yeah, so I mean, David Grush he's got one of the top lawyers and the top, people in the country behind him, and the reason for this is that Congress, working with people like Llewellyn Elizondo over the past 5 years, have been changing the laws, and the last batch of laws last year in the National Defence Authorization Act was whistleblower protection. Now you're talking about, retaliation against Grush. Well, that happened just last week. There was an article. He got arrested and he had post-traumatic stress disorder and he was having problems, and this journalist was tipped to go by the intelligence community, and he admitted this in an interview, to these records from the local sheriff's office. So that was an blatant attempt to smear Grush there. It's not the same as, he's so high profile right now.
Right, I'm going to have to cut across everybody. Sorry, Rev. If everybody saw me doing that, thinking, what's he doing? What's he putting his thumb up for? That weirdo. We're going to go to questions because I know that Les gets caned if he doesn't answer these questions.
Oh, yes. Certainly do.
So I do apologise, Lee, Rev, David, but let's just go to some questions.
Right, yeah, and thanks for that, Paul.
I actually like that, to be honest with you. It was interesting, but I agree with Les. We've got to do these questions.
Okay, I've got a question from Tony Worrell. It's for Paul. Has there been any other sightings of USOs locally by others after your sighting, Paul?
Not after my sighting, Tony, and I'll keep it quick, not for no other reason than I want to listen to the other three people here. But even RSPB staff, who I know listen to these live streams and watch these live streams, they've come to me and talked about spheres of light leaving the sea, red spheres of light leaving the sea off Bempton. So, no, not recently, but I've got those reports. And why do I cite RSPB staff? Because obviously it's an RSPB reserve and on the edge of those cliffs, which is public access. It's not restricted for anybody. That's where we're looking at all this activity. Fire away, Les.
Yeah, and Danny Egan, thanks for this super chat donation. Thank you very much. Okay, we've got a theme going on here tonight, Rev. I'll put this one on the screen for you. What is Rev's favourite Iron Maiden track, please?
It's got to be Run to the Hills, hasn't it?
All right, yeah, kind of lost me on that one, but yeah. Okay, and Chris Evers from, let's have a look if I can get this one up. Outer Limits magazine. Chris Evers, thanks for coming on the stream. David Cayton,
what's the latest
mutilation reports have you personally investigated?
And let's keep it tight, David, because we've got literally 10 minutes left.
Well, I'll be very brief because recently I've not investigated any. I'm 86 years of age now, and I'm trying to concentrate on gathering up information to put in a draft book, which I think is the most important thing to do, to document all this stuff into a concise place to make my case of who I think is doing it. And I have no doubts about that. So I've not had a case. The latest one, I suppose, Lee can mention is the Tobberden calf. That's a farm where I previously had mutilations of sheep from the same farmer who owned the dead calf. But I didn't get up to Tobberden to have a look. And the guy that took the pictures were very good. I think by the time you got there, Leek, it had been very much chewed and decomposed. So it was a waste of time. The farmer made no attempt to reclaim the animal, which is very interesting in itself.
Right, thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I move on with another question, Paul?
Yeah.
Let's have a look then. We've got
Thank you, David.
Matthew Roper. Dave, is there any hotspots geographically?
Very hard to answer that, because there's certainly hotspots for UFO activity across Yorkshire from the east coast, as Paul and Leslie know, to the west coast. But as far as the animals are concerned, can be anywhere. So my colleague in the APFU, Phil Hoyle, we looked a lot, and he particularly around the Shropshire area, south of Shrewsbury, onto the Welsh borders. But that was because it was in his realm, that's where he lived. But I'm sure we're only seeing the tip of an iceberg on these animals, and you could come up with a case somewhere accidentally in a region and suddenly realise there's another hotspot. But it's hard to define that as a definite thing.
I'm so pleased you said that, David, and I know where you were going with it, and you're spot on. It's the fact that, plus the fact that nobody wants to touch the subject. Hopefully, at some time in the future, you'll be recognised even more for being, it's maybe a big word, this, but being the pioneer in the subject of this, what's happening to humans and animals in the United Kingdom, because nobody wants to touch it. So I think it's happening more.
Yeah. And I found with ufologists, very few people. In fact, Graham Birdsall at the 2001 Leeds conference, where I gave my first talk, he asked the audience of 800 people, David needs help. Who's going to help him with this? It's more than a one-man job. And only one person came up and said he would help me, who turned out was connected to the authorities. And all he wanted to do was find out what we were up to, particularly Phil Hoyle and myself, and report back. And I have good evidence, I won't go into at the moment,
no, that's fine.
why I know he was a plant. Yeah. So it's a very unpleasant job. And how many people are happy to go and look at a dead sheep, forcibly open its jaw and see if the tongue's there or not, and then turn it over and look at all the injuries and photograph it and record it, and then put them in your car boot and drive them home to photograph them and put them in your garden shed overnight before a pathologist would have a look. I was lucky on that. But it's not a nice subject. And that's why a lot of people who are into ufology find it very difficult, and it upsets their view of ufology, and they want to play it down. And
unfortunately, it has to be faced, David, and you've been brave enough to face it. Alex Thompson, go on.
I've got a question, Alex Thompson. Question for David, if possible. Do you think the mutilations can be sometimes ritualistic?
Well, I don't believe so, because they're so common. And the same, and the technology is so advanced that no human persons, quoting Professor Fremont, I've said his name now, could possibly do that. Even he, as a pathologist who works on human murder cases, said what the technology is being used, we haven't got the capability or knowledge to do it. So I don't believe there might be odd persons trying and copycat it to follow their individual cause, but I don't know of any of those cases anyway. So that's my answer to that.
I may be wrong with where Alex is going with this, but I think he may be alluding to the fact, and we'll not go too deep and dark into this, but sometimes ritualistic practices are performed using animals. So could we get it wrong in some instances? And I know what you looked at were totally opposite to what Alex is talking about, but could the two be misconstrued at times? And I'll throw that out. We want to be quick. We want to be tight here. We've got 7 minutes left. Anybody got a quick?
Yeah, I mean, ritualistic killings are different because they're normally bloodletting, and heart is taken out and then used, whereas the mutes are completely different. So you can't really, you can't get the 2 minute bit, can you?
No, no.
Okay.
I agree. I just say it's an explanation that's thrown out there by the media a lot on this topic.
Yeah, and a great answer, Lee.
Okay, I just want to get to Joe Novak. What words like H, M are not allowed to say, and how do you know? Well, these I can answer this in one statement. It's YouTube guidelines. Simple as that. So there's only certain things you can say there, Joe. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question, which is,
how can I contact David? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I can give you my email, which is davidacayton@hotmail.com. All in lowercase, of course.
I was just going to say, is it all lowercase, David? Yeah.
Okay.
davidacayton@hotmail.com. I'm a bit reluctant to give the personal phone number out because
No. Yeah. Okay. So thanks for that, David. Rocky Nuisance is asking, when Rev had his experiences, was he left dazed and confused?
Yeah, very good. No, I was all right. It was just normal. I mean, stuff's happened to me that long. It's become, it doesn't really affect me like that.
Okay, I'll leave it to you guys to get a
well,
couple more subjects in then, probably.
We've got 5 minutes left, and I didn't cut across these congressional differences between, not differences, but Rev and Lee, because I wanted to. I just knew that Les wanted to get some questions in. So let's just jump back to it for 5 minutes. We aren't going too deep. We've literally got 5 minutes. So your views on the whistleblowers, Rev, what are that we've been spun a yarn?
Yeah, I'll give. If you look at the Warren Commission that was set up to investigate the Kennedy assassination, you look at the steps they went through. The people that actually saw stuff that discredited the official verdict disappeared. So if you take the Warren Commission and how that process happened, it's the same process that's happening now. It's just been pushed out into the public in a different way.
Right. So what's your thoughts on that, Lee?
Well, I do think it's different because what we're seeing now is Congress writing legislation each year to try and pin this project, these programs down. And so we'll see. As I said before, time will tell. So if Biden signs off on this, it's actually called the Disclosure Act of 2024. So if Biden signs off on that and it goes through, which will be about Christmas time, then I think there's actually a deadline. There's a deadline for whoever may have this material to provide an itemized list of what they've got. So an audit, and then they have to allow inspectors to come in and examine it. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, the laws that they've put in place, they don't abide by their own laws, do they? We do, but they don't.
They're very slow. They're very slow to pick it up. You're absolutely right. Yes, you are. But the thing is about this is that Congress hands the National Defense Authorization Act alongside the DoD's budget. And they have the powers to say, you're not getting your budget, So they do have the power and the authority to crack this. Whether the desire is another matter.
Yeah. Do you know? I think I'm kind of leaning towards Lee here with this, to be honest with you, and Rev's one of my best friends, but I'm kind of leaning towards what Lee's saying, and I think there's a lot of truth and a lot of strength in what he's saying, because the past leaves you asking all these questions, doesn't it? Let's face it. But I do think we've maybe reached a little bit of a turning point. I hope we have. Maybe I'm being a bit too optimistic. Have you any views on this, David?
I can't say I'm following it closely to make a sensible comment, either supporting Lee's views or Rev's.
No.
I know that historically the American government and various branches cover up things, including the Kennedy assassination, but I think we've moved on a long way since then. And I tend to think Lee's right in his presumption of what is about to happen when they get certain things through Congress and what have you. But again, it's another of those time will tell situations.
It is, and I think I probably disagree with Lee when it comes to his thoughts on the reasons for the calling these things non-human. And I think and I've probably got it all wrong, but I think that they've understood that these, I disagree with David here, aren't necessarily extraterrestrials. I think these things have been here all the time. And I think that they're moving along amongst us. And I think that calling them non-human is the first step into introducing us to this. And I may be being naive. I don't know anybody's views. We've got literally 1 minute left.
Yeah, I can say that the non-human thing is...
I think...
Go on,
Rev.
The non-human thing, NATO during the lockdowns put a law through declassifying humans as humans anymore. So maybe that's a reference to that.
Okay. And I think we're just about there. And David, Rev, Lee, Les, and Les didn't have a question this week, which is unusual.
There's a lot of questions I didn't get
well, you're going to get
on the
hammered for it.
screen, and I apologise to everybody who sent a question.
I hope it's not Lorraine. I hope it's not,
three questions from Lorraine, I think there was. And
well, you should have done it.
I apologise. Okay, so Lee, thanks for coming on tonight's stream. Sorry about the technical breakdowns that you suffered, and well, there's not a lot we could have done about that, but yeah, I think StreamYard was playing up as well. So, Lee, we'll say good night to you.
Thank you, Lee.
Oh,
yeah, cheerio, Lee.
All right.
Yeah,
Thanks,
yeah,
Bob.
it's maybe frozen, Lee. And
I think he's gone. Yeah, thanks, Lee. All right, bye now.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, Revenant, same thing. Great job on the show, and your input is invaluable as always. And you get some great questions in for our guests as well. So, good night.
Night all.
Take care, mate. Bye-bye. And then we go to David. David, thank you so much. Honestly, we really appreciate this.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Benchmark researcher and...
very healthy thing to do to have these discussions and questions.
Yeah, you don't get the credit you deserve, mate. Honestly, it's
and David, can I just say one thing? You don't look 86. Yeah, you look 60, but never 86. So that's well done.
I look good for 21. Yeah.
Well, I need 10 years to get my book out.
Okay, good night, David.
Okay, thanks a lot. Good night.
Thank you.
Paul, another one in the bag, and a couple of technical issues there again, but they're beyond our control. Next week, I can't remember who's on the stream next week. You know,
we may have, and I might have got it wrong. We may be talking about the definitive Pascagoula, Philip Mantle and Irina Scott. I could be wrong, so apologies if I am.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Yeah. So thanks for everybody who came onto the stream tonight. Thanks for the super chat, and from me and Paul, it's good night.
Thank you.